Dr. Elena drew closer, her breath warm against his ear. The office lights muted, a faint gleam peeking through the slats. Her voice trembled with need and hesitation as she muttered, "Are you sure you're okay with this?" As soon as their eyes met, the distance between them vanished, and his heart began to accelerate. With her palm delicately resting on his chest and their lips hovering just a breath apart, the tension was terrible. Professionalism had always been the hallmark of Dr. Elena Carter. She was one of the most well-liked doctors in the practice because of her keen mind, calm manner, and endearing charm. She was respected by both patients and coworkers as a senior resident. She was more than just a doctor to Nathan, her newest patient. To him, she was a conundrum that he was unable to solve. Dr. Carter had been recommended to Nathan because no other doctor seemed to be able to treat a persistent sports injury. He thought his visit would be regular, but as soon as he entered her office, he understood that this was not the case. Her steady assurance made every word she spoke appear calculated and intentional, and her piercing blue eyes seemed to pierce right through him. Her presence was captivating. Their meetings started off just like any other. She inquired about his medical history, took notes with an unwavering focus, and provided considerate, straightforward advice. However, as the weeks passed, something changed. Their conversations became very intimate. One quick touch here, one long look there. Even though neither of them dared to admit it out loud, Nathan couldn't get rid of the feeling that their bond was growing stronger. One evening, Dr. Carter had scheduled him for a late appointment, her voice over the phone unusually soft as she explained her packed day. "I don't want you waiting for weeks to be seen," she had said, her tone almost apologetic. Nathan didn't think much of it at the time, but as he stepped into the nearly deserted office building, the quietness around him sent a strange thrill down his spine. The waiting room was empty when he arrived. He could hear the faint hum of equipment in the back, the muffled sound of papers shuffling. Dr. Wheel, Carter's office door was slightly ajar, and he knocked softly before stepping inside. "Come in, Nathan," she said, looking up from her desk. Her white coat hung loosely over her shoulders, the soft glow of her desk lamp illuminating her features in a way that made her look almost ethereal. She smiled, motioning for him to take a seat. "Late night, huh?" he said, his voice light, trying to ignore the flutter in his chest as her gaze met his. She chuckled softly, leaning back in her chair. "You could say that, but it's worth it. I don't like leaving cases unresolved." Their conversation started with the usual medical updates, how his recovery was progressing, the exercises she wanted him to continue, but soon drifted into more personal territory. She asked him about his work, his hobbies, and even his dreams. The professional boundary between them seemed to blur with each passing minute. Nathan found himself opening up in ways he hadn't expected, sharing stories he hadn't told anyone in years. And when she laughed, really laughed at one of his jokes, he felt an undeniable pull toward her, a longing that was both exhilarating and terrifying. As their conversation wound down, she stood and walked around the desk, leaning against it as she faced him. "You've made incredible progress, Nathan," she said, her voice softer now, more intimate. "But I can't help but feel like there's more going on here. You seem tense." He swallowed hard, unsure if it was her words or the way she was looking at him that sent a jolt through his body. "Maybe it's just the late hour," he said, trying to sound nonchalant. "Dr. Prosty." Carter tilted her head, a small smile playing on her lips. "Or maybe it's something else." The air between them grew thick with tension. Nathan's gaze dropped to her hand, which rested lightly on the edge of the desk, just inches from his. Without thinking, he reached out, his fingers brushing against hers. She didn't pull away. "Elena," he said, the name slipping from his lips before he could stop himself. Her eyes widened slightly at the sound, but she didn't correct him. Instead, she leaned closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "This isn't professional." "No," he agreed, his voice low. "It's not." Her hand moved to his chest, her touch sending a shiver down his spine. "We should stop," she said, though her tone lacked conviction. "Should we?" he asked, his gaze locking onto hers. The space between them seemed to disappear, and before he could second-guess himself, their lips met in a kiss that was both hesitant and electric. Dr. Carter pulled back slightly, her breath shallow as she searched his eyes. "Nathan, if we cross this line—" "I don't care," he interrupted, his voice firm. "I've wanted this, you, for too long." Her hesitation melted away as their lips found each other again, this time with a passion that left no room for doubt. Her hands slid up his chest, tangling in his hair as she pressed closer, and Nathan felt himself falling deeper into the moment, into her. The office, once sterile and impersonal, now felt like a cocoon, shielding them from the outside world. The weight of their choices, the consequences that would inevitably follow, seemed to fade into the background as they gave in to the connection that had been simmering between them for weeks. As the night wore on, they found themselves tangled together in a whirlwind of emotion and desire, the walls they had built between them crumbling with every touch, every whispered word. It was reckless, forbidden, and utterly consuming, and neither of them wanted it to stop. It was reckless, forbidden, and utterly consuming, and neither of them wanted it to stop. As the dim light from the office lamp cast flickering shadows on the walls, Dr. Carter's lips moved against Emma's with a fervor that bordered on desperation. His hands found her waist, pulling her closer until there was no space left between them. Emma tilted her head back, gasping softly as his lips trailed along the curve of her neck. The tension between them had reached its breaking point, and in this moment all the rules they'd upheld dissolved like whispers in the wind. "Dr. Carter," she breathed, her voice a mixture of hesitation and longing. "Call me Alex," he murmured against her skin, his tone low and commanding. His hand slipped to the small of her back, steadying her as he kissed her again, his lips exploring hers with unrestrained intensity. Their movements grew bolder, the sterile confines of the clinic fading into the background. Emma's fingers tangled in his hair, pulling him closer, as if afraid he might change his mind. Alex groaned softly, his breath warm against her collarbone as his hands roamed, exploring the contours of her body. "You don't know how long I've wanted this," he confessed, his voice rough with desire. "Seeing you in this office every day, it's been driving me insane." Emma's pulse raced, her heart pounding so loudly she was certain he could hear it. "Then don't stop," she whispered, her words daring and full of promise. "I've wanted this too." With a newfound confidence, Emma took the lead, pressing Alex against the edge of the examination table. Her lips found his again, her kiss fierce and unapologetic. His hands gripped her hips, his touch possessive, as if she were the only thing grounding him in this moment of pure chaos. The soft hum of the clinic's air conditioning was the only sound aside from their hurried breaths and the occasional rustle of fabric. Alex's fingers found the hem of her blouse, hesitating for a brief moment before sliding it upward. Emma helped him, their movements synchronized as her blouse joined the lab coat discarded on the chair. "You're incredible," he muttered, his gaze drinking her in like she was a masterpiece he'd been forbidden to touch. Emma reached for the buttons of his shirt, her fingers trembling with anticipation. As she slipped it off his shoulders, the sharp contrast between his professional demeanor and the raw passion he exuded now made her head spin. "Alex," she murmured, his name slipping from her lips like a confession. Her hands explored his chest, her touch tentative at first but growing bolder with every passing second. He responded by lifting her onto the examination table, his hands firm yet gentle as he positioned her. His lips captured hers once more, the kiss deepening until it felt as though the rest of the world had disappeared entirely. Their connection was electric, each touch igniting a fire that threatened to consume them both. As Alex's hands slid lower, teasing the edge of her skirt, Emma arched into him, her breath hitching as her thoughts blurred into a haze of need. And then, just as the tension reached its peak, the faint sound of footsteps echoed from the hallway. Both froze, their breaths ragged, the reality of their surroundings crashing back like a cold wave. Alex stepped back, his hands still resting lightly on her thighs. "We should," he began, his voice shaky, but Emma cut him off with a soft smile. "Later," she whispered, sliding off the table and smoothing her skirt. "This isn't over." Her confidence left Alex speechless as she grabbed her blouse and slipped it back on, her movements deliberate and unhurried. Before leaving, she glanced back at him, her eyes sparkling with mischief. "Lock the door next time, Doctor," she teased, disappearing down the hallway and leaving Alex alone, his mind spinning from the whirlwind of what had just happened and what was yet to come. Alex stood motionless for a moment, the remnants of her touch lingering on his skin like a brand. The door clicked softly shut behind her, but the sound was deafening in the otherwise silent clinic. His heartbeat thundered in his ears as he tried to steady himself, his mind replaying every second of their stolen moment. He moved to the door, locking it this time, a rueful smile tugging at his lips. "Later," she had said, the word heavy with promises and complications. His hands found the edge of the desk as he leaned against it, exhaling deeply. What had just happened wasn't just a crossing of lines, it was obliterating them. The following day, Nathan sat at home, replaying the events in his mind. His phone buzzed, and he glanced at the screen to see a message from Dr. Carter. "Nathan, I'd like to discuss your next steps in recovery. Are you available this evening?" The text was innocuous, professional even, but he could read between the lines. His stomach tightened as he typed back, "I'll be there." That evening, the clinic felt different. The usual bustling energy was replaced by an almost oppressive stillness, each step echoing down the empty corridors. Nathan pushed open the door to her office, finding Dr. Carter already waiting for him. She looked up, her composed demeanor a stark contrast to the warmth he remembered from last night. "Thanks for coming in," she said, motioning for him to sit. "I've reviewed your case further and wanted to ensure we're on the right path." Her tone was all business, but her eyes betrayed her. Nathan could see the flicker of hesitation, the unspoken words she was holding back. He decided to take the first step. "Elena," he began, leaning forward. "About last night." She held up a hand, cutting him off. "Nathan, what happened was unprofessional. It shouldn't have." Her voice wavered, and she looked away, unable to meet his gaze. "It can't happen again." He nodded slowly, though the knot in his chest tightened. "I get it, but you can't tell me it didn't mean anything." Her eyes snapped back to his, anger and vulnerability clashing in her expression. "Of course it meant something, that's the problem." Silence settled between them, heavy and suffocating. Finally she stood, pacing to the window and looking out at the city lights. "I've worked too hard to get where I am," she said quietly. "I can't risk it all for someone who might not even be real." Nathan stood, crossing the room to stand beside her. "You think I'm not real?" he asked, his voice soft but firm. "Elena, I've never felt more alive than I do when I'm with you." Her breath hitched, but she didn't turn to face him. Instead, she spoke in a whisper, almost to herself. "This can't end well." "It doesn't have to end at all," he countered, his hand brushing hers. She turned then, her resolve cracking as she looked up at him. "You've been holding back for so long, protecting yourself, but maybe it's time to let someone in." Her lips parted as if to respond, but no words came. Instead, she closed the distance between them, her kiss more hesitant than before, but no less consuming. This time, it wasn't just about passion, it was about trust. Their connection deepened over the following weeks, each late-night visit blurring the lines of their relationship further. They navigated their shared secret with equal parts exhilaration and fear, stolen moments in the quiet corners of the clinic, becoming their refuge. But secrets have a way of surfacing, and theirs was no exception. One evening, as they shared a quiet laugh over coffee in her office, the door swung open abruptly. Nathan and Elena froze, their smiles fading as a shadow loomed in the doorway. It was Dr. Patel, the clinic's director, his expression unreadable as he took in the scene before him. "Dr. Carter," he said, his voice steady but cold, "we need to talk, now." Nathan stood, his heart pounding as he glanced at Elena. Her face was pale, but she managed a tight smile. "I'll see you at your next appointment," she said, her voice a fragile attempt at normalcy. He nodded, leaving the office with the weight of their reality pressing down on him. Outside, he paused, leaning against the wall and trying to catch his breath. Whatever was about to happen, he knew one thing for sure. Nothing would ever be the same.